Okay, in today's lesson, we're going to go over multiplying any number by a fraction and what happens to the resulting product when you multiply by the various fractions. So we're going to get started here with the very first one. We're going to multiply any number by a fraction that's less than 1. So I'm going to use a fraction less than 1. I want to use the same number every time. I'm going to use that number of 3. And I'm going to multiply by a fraction that's less than 1. The fraction I'm going to use today is 1/2. And what's that product going to be? So let's take a look at what this looks like. This also says 3 groups of 1/2. So I'm going to get 3 groups of 1/2. So here's one group of a half. Here's my second group of a half. And finally my third group of 1/2. And what is my answer? When I put these together, I can put these two halves together, and that would make one whole, because a half plus a half is a whole, which we already know. And plus then the next, or the last half, I would have 1/2. So what results when I take any number multiplied by a fraction less than 1? My product is less than the original number I started with. Okay, and we're going to move right along here with multiplying any number by a fraction that's equal to 1. So again, I want to use that same original number, or number I started with, of 3, and multiply by a fraction that's equivalent to 1. In order for a fraction to be equivalent to 1, the numerator and denominator have to be exactly the same. This number would equal 1. I need 2 groups. That's what the denominator tells me, and I have 2 groups, so 2 halves. What does that look like? I'm going to have 3 groups of 2 halves. Here's 1/2. Here's my second half. I have another group of 2 halves, and finally a third group of 2 halves. So now you'll be able to see that 3 times 2 halves, I can put some of these together to make whole. These 2 halves will equal 1 whole. These 2 halves would equal 1 whole. And my final 2 halves would equal 1 whole. 3 times 2 halves equals 3. This is also the identity property of multiplication. When we're multiplying any number multiplied by 1, that original number will keep its own identity. So we're multiplying any number times a fraction equivalent to 1. The product is the same as the original number. And finally, I'm going to multiply any number by a fraction that is greater than 1. And again, I'm going to use 3, just so we're the same. Multiply by a fraction that's greater than 1, so my numerator has to be larger than my denominator. I'm going to do 3 halves. What results when I do that, or what happens? So here's 2 halves. I can see 1/2 and 2 halves. I have 2 halves there. My first group of 3 halves. These are 2 halves again, plus my third. There's another group of 3 halves. And finally, my last group of 3 halves. So 3 times, or 3 groups of 3 halves equals what? And that is, I have 1, 2, 3. These two together will be my fourth, and this is a half left over. So 3 times 3 halves is 4.5. So when I multiply by a fraction that is greater than 1, my product is greater than the original number. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Let's just review this really quickly. So we're just going over this. When you multiply any number by a fraction less than 1, the product will be less than the original number. When you multiply any number by a fraction that's equal to 1, the product will be equal to the original number. And when you multiply any number by a fraction greater than 1, the product will be greater than the original number.